Melanie, much of your work is centered on ways in which we can connect with the non-conservative, skeptical voter. What was your take on what we saw?
You know what, can I weave that into my presentation? That's what
Absolutely.
I was planning on doing. I think the IWF one does exactly what I'm going to be describing in my presentation, which is how to message not just intelligently, but emotionally intelligently. Should I go?
Ladies and gentlemen, Melanie Sturm.
Well, it is a real delight to be here. I've been admiring Heather and the Independent Women's Forum and Voice from afar, working behind enemy lines as I do in Aspen, Colorado. And it's really a delight to be among the supporters of Independent Women's Voice, an organization I admire as much for its winning ways, as we heard about this morning, as I do its winning mandate and mission, which is to promote the values and principles that made America the freest, most prosperous, most decent society in human history. I share Heather's love for the exceptionalism of America. And I have a sneaking suspicion that those of you in this room share my profound desire to reverse the misperception that we are uncaring, bigoted extremists. Any chance you're all interested in doing that? No doubt, because you're supporters of Independent Women's Voice and Forum, which is out there on the front lines, battling for the hearts and minds with what I'm calling emotionally intelligent communications, often winning where the political class has gone and failed and lost. And I'm also really delighted to be on this panel with Kellyanne. The first time I heard her speak was in early 2013, and she was on a panel talking about the 2012 election. And she got a really big laugh when she said that the Republican Party was afflicted with a life-threatening disease. You called it staph infection. And in other words, that the 2012 election was as botched as that RNC ad that we just watched.
They're back. They work for Jeb Bush this time.
Oh, there you go.
Except for April.
But after I heard her speak, it really heightened my awareness that we really can't rely on the Republican Party to advance our cause, that it's really up to us as individuals to do what we can. And each of us can do things in different ways. And so it was just after that I helped co-found this Engage to Win, the persuasion workshop that I teach. And I'm going to be sharing with you some of the lessons in a condensed form that we teach in that about how to reach and persuade what I call the skeptical. Because if it can be done in Aspen, it can be done anywhere. Okay, so let's get going here. Oops, I should have tested this. Okay, so just by way of a little background, I have no background in journalism either, or politics, but it was about 5 years ago I was approached by the editor of the Aspen Times, who asked me to help him diversify the opinion page. And it's not because he needed a woman or a Jew. And so I was really nervous, quite honestly. I didn't want to be the scourge of Aspen. And so tentatively, I started thinking about how could I engage readers who wouldn't normally read conservative commentary. And I launched my column, Think Again, You Might Change Your Mind. And what I tried to do is to write respectful commentary that exposes readers to facts and arguments they're likely not reading elsewhere. And in the process, thanks to the internet, I've extended my readership base well beyond Aspen, and I'm very lucky. I have the time to engage with readers, and I've learned an enormous amount about how to engage with the skeptical. And so I will just tell you up front, the dirty little secret that I learned gradually is that vast majorities share common ground with us. And it's just that we can't call that common ground conservative until we've rehabilitated our image. And But what I hear mostly from engaging with readers is this visceral, even irrational contempt for Republicans. That's usually what it comes down to. They'll agree with everything I write and just say, the Republicans are so bad. And so that's why I like to modify Margaret Thatcher. And I say, first we must win their trust. Then our winning arguments will win the vote. Because the current reality really plays to the partisans and the politicians that want to divide us. And they create this manufactured social strife. So to win the trust of the skeptical, we need to move from this adversarialness, like the RNC ad was called Breaking Up, actually, as if people might even like the idea of breaking up, as if it's something that people like to do. So can we move from that sort of adversarialness in our political discourse to what IWV called their ad, A Better Direction? And you see here, she's leaning in. Just like in the ad, she's leaning in and listening and validating the concerns of the person that she's talking to. This is an overwhelming slide, and Kellyanne probably can speak to this far better than I can, but one of the things I realized after writing for a while, I always wanted to write on things where I thought I had solid footing. And what I discovered is that vast majorities agree, 60% plus majorities on this slide, and I really wanted to overwhelm you. I could add way more, but 60% plus majorities actually agree on big issues and share our values. We are not extremists, but extremists rejecting majority opinions govern us. And that's because enough of those agreeing with us are peeled off to vote with the compassionate side, aided by false narratives that cast us as ogres and, frankly, our own inartfulness. These are the misperceptions that we labor under, that liberalism is the politics of kindness, and meanwhile, vast majorities do not consider Republicans compassionate. And so it's not a surprise when the media propagates things like this. The Hill, which is a supposedly mainstream media publication, tweeted out that the dentist that killed Cecil the Lion also gave $5,000 to Mitt Romney. And then we heard ourselves, I think Krauthammer called this the gaffe of 2015. McCarthy, he not only undermined his own speaker aspirations, but he sullied the reputation of the Benghazi Committee, whose purpose is to go and find the truth for the victims and the families of the victims' sake. And he also undermined our entire movement. So consequently, all of these things combine to make us be portrayed as cruel, greedy, callous, at least Republicans in this instance. And as I think Heather mentioned this is the consequence, the grave consequence, that in the 2012 election, there were 4 exit polls. Romney trounced Obama on 3 out of the 4 questions having to do with vision, values, and leadership, but on that all-important question, who cares about people like me, he lost 18 to 81, which means that there were Republicans that actually thought that Obama cared more about them than Romney, which I just find astonishing. So, if you remember nothing else from my presentation, I hope you will remember Jack Kemp's truism. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if we're going to reach the persuadables, it's really going to be because we have met them where they are, we are thoughtful, we're caring, we're compassionate, just like the IWV ad with the woman listening, validating. You'll see at the end with my slide that talks about the keys to persuasion, that she does several of those things. But the point is that it's not what she said to the woman that was complaining, it's what that woman heard. That's what matters. Now, this is a slide, there's so much to say about this slide. What I want to focus on is, in contrast to the left-right spectrum, there's a way to break down voters in terms of how they can be appealed to. Leadership Program of the Rockies, which I just did this last year, came up with this slide. And suffice it to say, those on the left, the equal outcomes crowd, they're only 8% thankfully. They can't really be converted, but they can be powered down, which actually is good. I do it all the time. I love doing it. They don't write nasty comments on my column or send in letters to the editor, so that's a good thing, creating a better environment for our society, enhancing reforms and candidates. But it's really these 4 categories to the right that that most people focus, and the one that I like to focus on, the one that Independent Women's Voice and Heather focuses on, and we didn't plan. I didn't know what her presentation was going to be this morning, and I'm so thrilled that we're reinforcing one another. But for that category, the largest category, 34%, the fair and care voter, facts are uncaring. So when and you'll see with the next slide, that to appeal to them, we have to do it on the basis of fairness and compassion. Now, the problem with appealing to the other types of voters is that when we do that, the political culture misconstrues what we say, and then it turns into, oh, we can't afford Obamacare, therefore Republicans don't want to insure the uninsured, and Republicans want to deport Hispanic grandmas, or take away women's reproductive rights. So best to stay with the fair and care type of messaging. And here's why. As you can see, we speak to everyone when we appeal to compassion and fairness. So this is a slide that Arthur Brooks of AEI had in his presentation at one of our Engage to Win workshops. It's based on the work of Jonathan Haidt, who wrote the book The Righteous Mind. And Haidt established this moral foundation framework. Essentially, we all see politics and policy through the prism of certain moralities. And you could actually go online, it's yourmorals.org, and take a short survey to find out where you rate. But I'm just going to tell you the punchline. Conservatives, we tend to care about all 5 moral foundations approximately equally. Liberals, however, are off the charts in terms of compassion and fairness. And fair and care voters, obviously, the ones that are our skeptical group, the skeptical group being the women, minorities, and the youth. I forgot to say that earlier. And so obviously we speak to everyone when we appeal to compassion and fairness, but at the same time, we're only speaking to ourselves when we emphasize the others. So for example, it was only conservatives that cared when Miley Cyrus was twerking, for example, or that Obama didn't wear a lapel pin in the flag on his lapel in 2008. Now you'll notice here, money is not a moral foundation. And yet we make so many of our arguments about money. Now that's not to say we can't and shouldn't, we need to, but it needs to be framed in terms of compassion and fairness. So for example, rather than railing against unsustainable entitlements, we can argue it's unfair young workers paying into the system now won't get these benefits when they retire. Okay, so here's my second to the last slide. These are the keys that I want to emphasize, keys to reaching the skeptical. First, there's a big difference, as I've been discovering over the 5 years I've been writing an op-ed, that there's a big difference between expressing your opinion and actually persuading. Because persuasion, as was evident hopefully by the first demonstration, the first presentation, is a journey toward a uniting conclusion. Now I've handed out 2 examples of my columns, and my columns typically follow this template. I try to do all of these things. And you will note that the last line of my columns is always this final think again. That's the common ground I like to lead people to, and it's generally something that people would agree with instinctively on their own. I'm just leading them there. And when they can agree with it at the end of the article, chances are I'm moving them my way. That's why I like to do that. But you'll note that I put here in parentheses, the IWV ad was very validating. It validated the concerns of the woman, the despairing woman. And then the second, I've already talked about compassion and fairness, but just to note on the video, the woman kept on saying, said things like, you deserve better. You know, it's like this notion of fairness. As Arthur Brooks says, the winning side always fights for people, not against things. We don't do this well. We're always fighting against or for, against big government regulations and taxes and spending. We need to fight for job searchers, the energy poor, the sick, connecting their plights to progressivism and solutions to conservatism's expanding pie. Then, don't bash their political identity. This was mentioned earlier as well. Obviously, the RNC ad was a little in your face with the politics of it all. And then, and in fact, for the first 18 months I wrote, I don't think I mentioned Obama once. I rarely mention Republican and Democrat. Now, in one of the columns I handed out, I do mention an interesting survey done by Democrat pollster Mark Melman, but I don't say he's Democrat. And I try to keep it balanced. I also, the other column that I gave you, it does deal with Hillary Clinton. Around election time, I do feel I need to take on the politicians. But I did it in a very balanced way in the context of also taking on the Republican Congress. So cite trusted sources. It was said before, not Breitbart or the Wall Street Journal editorial page. When I can, I cite the New York Times, the Brookings Institute, any Democrat that says anything remotely useful to me, I quote them. In fact, sometimes I just file them away saying, I want to use this, like the Mark Melman study that I put in here. It was fascinating in my column from the summer. And then I like to say there are righteous liberals. There are people like Alan Dershowitz and Jonathan Turley who are constitutional scholars, supporters of Obama's policies, who've opposed what he's been doing. In fact, Jonathan Turley, great quote I used, said that Barack Obama was the very danger the Constitution was created to prevent. It's pretty powerful. Then ask rhetorical questions. Don't make declarative statements. So I had last summer a column right after the Supreme Court decisions. My column was titled, Are Americans Still in Charge of Their Lives? I asked it question mark. I didn't say they weren't. And then I led people on a journey toward a conclusion I hope that they would draw on their own, because when people answer rhetorical questions, they own the answer. That was used in the video. She says in the IWV version of the video, did he ever do more than talk? It was a rhetorical question. Very useful there. It's telling stories. They're memorable. People will walk away remembering those, in fact, not other things. And they're also indisputable. Words really matter, which hopefully is evident, pretty self-evident to this crowd. So for example, in recent columns, I wrote about the conservative bloc that was being recalled from an education board in Colorado. Didn't call them conservative. I called them education reformers, and I called their opponents, not teachers, because teacher is a word that's warm and fuzzy, or teachers union. I called them the education establishment, because everyone's so anti-establishment these days. And then, for example, I don't defend capitalism. That's a Marxist word that's been sullied over the generations. I call it free enterprise, or economic freedom, which is one of the principles that you'll see at the end that people actually agree with. And there, at the end, we search for the common ground, which I'll get to in a moment, my next and last slide. And the ad that, the IWV ad, came to common ground with the conclusion, we all trusted him, right? Okay, so last slide. These are the shared American values that I try to weave into my commentary using nice quotes from good Democrats who are useful to me. And what I will tell you is that people from across the spectrum will agree when I make arguments in these terms. And so in closing here, I just want to say that I know that we feel beleaguered, perceived, misperceived as we are, and especially at election time, it's hard. But I don't want people in this room to ever forget that we inhabit the moral high ground. The truth is on our side, and human history is evidence that our policies and principles are the best for the most people, especially the most vulnerable, and progressivism devastates the very people it purports to help. We are not the black-hearted and they the kind-hearted, and they can't continue to coast on their benign intentions above the wreckage of their policies. That's the role of the Independent Women's Voice and Forum. I'm so proud and pleased to be here speaking to you all, and I know that the work that the IWV is doing to counter those false narratives, that's precisely the mission critical work that we need at this moment right now. So thank you very much.
Should I questions?
Well, that was really incredible and insightful and useful information for us all. Thank you, Melanie. An important voting group comes to mind when hearing that, and that's women. Kellyanne, can you talk to us about about how we can overcome challenges of speaking to women as conservatives?
Sure. Well, okay.